The gunshot wound in his side had festered for 3 days before the fever took him completely, dragging him down into a darkness so complete that Archer Novak thought death had finally claimed him on that scorching August afternoon in 1878. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, broken pieces of sensation that made no sense. Heat, but not the burning heat of infection. This was different, external, pressing down on him like a physical weight. The smell of sage and something cooking, meat perhaps, mixed with the acrid scent of medicinal herbs he couldn't name. And pain, Lord, the pain in his side felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through his ribs and was twisting it with every breath he managed to draw. He tried to open his eyes, but his lids felt weighted down with lead. A cool cloth pressed against his forehead, and he heard humming, a woman's voice, low and melodic, singing something he recognized from childhood, but couldn't quite place. The cloth moved across his face with gentle efficiency, and despite the agony radiating from his wound, Archer felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot of fear he hadn't known he was carrying. "Don't try to move just yet," the voice said, closer now, and definitely female. "You have been thrashing around enough for 3 men. Your wound opened twice, and I had to stitch it closed again both times." Archer forced his eyes open, blinking against the dim light filtering through what appeared to be canvas above him. A tent then, not a building. The woman leaning over him had dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes the color of new grass looked down at him, with a mixture of concern and something else he couldn't quite read. Exhaustion, maybe. Her face was sun-browned and showed the fine lines of someone who spent their days outdoors, and there was a smudge of what might have been dirt or dried blood on her cheek. "Where?" he managed to croak out, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed the entire desert. "About 15 miles northwest of Angel's Camp," she said, reaching for a tin cup. She slid her hand behind his head, lifting it with surprising strength, and brought the cup to his lips. "Drink slowly. Your stomach hasn't held anything down in 2 days." The water was cool and tasted faintly of minerals, probably from a creek or spring. Archer took small sips as instructed, though every instinct screamed at him to gulp it down. When she pulled the cup away, he let his head fall back against what felt like a rolled blanket serving as a pillow. "My horse," he said. "Dead when I found you. I'm sorry. You were about 100 yards from the animal, crawling toward the creek. You didn't make it." She set the cup aside and wrung out the cloth in a basin he couldn't see. "I have been camped here for a week, panning for gold in the creek. Heard the gunshot 3 days ago, but didn't find you until the next morning. Whoever shot you took everything, your gun, your boots, even your hat." Archer closed his eyes, trying to remember. He'd been riding from Sonora, heading toward Angel's Camp, with the pay from his last job working cattle for a rancher outside Columbia. 3 months of hard work, enough money to finally buy that piece of land he'd been eyeing. 4 men had come out of nowhere on the road, and he'd been stupid enough to reach for his gun instead of just handing over his saddlebags. "They got my pay," he said, more to himself than to her. "They got a lot more than that if you don't fight this infection," she replied, her tone matter of fact, but not unkind. "The bullet went clean through, which is good, but you tore through hell and half of California before I found you. The wound was full of dirt and God knows what else. I have been using yarrow and honey to fight the infection, along with some willow bark tea for the fever, but you have been burning up for 2 days straight." He opened his eyes again and studied her more carefully. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, patched in places and stained from hard use. Her hands were calloused, the nails short and practical, and there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who didn't give up easily. No wedding ring, he noticed, though that didn't necessarily mean anything out here. "I didn't catch your name," he said. "That is because I didn't throw it," she replied, but there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Delilah Lawson? And you are?" "Archer Novak. I owe you my life, Miss Lawson." "Mrs., actually, though I'm a widow." She dipped the cloth again and began wiping down his chest and arms. "And you don't owe me anything except to not die in my camp. I have enough troubles without adding that to the list." Despite his condition, Archer felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with fever as she efficiently cleaned his upper body. Delilah seemed completely unbothered by his state of undress, working with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. "How long was you married?" he asked, partly to distract himself. 3 years. Robert died 2 winters ago, pneumonia." Her voice remained steady, but he caught the slight pause in her movements. We had a small ranch outside Angel's Camp, but I couldn't keep it going alone. Sold everything except my tent, my panning equipment, and my mule. Been prospecting since spring, trying to get enough together to start over somewhere else. Any luck with the gold? Some, enough to keep eating, not enough to get ahead. She finished cleaning him and pulled a worn quilt up to his chest. You need to sleep if you can. The fever breaks and then comes back. Has been doing that for 2 days. When it spikes again, I'll be here. Archer wanted to protest, to tell her she didn't need to waste her time on him, but exhaustion pulled at him like a physical force. His eyes drifted closed, and he heard her moving around the tent, the soft sounds of her making herself busy. Just before sleep took him, he felt her hand rest briefly on his forehead, checking his temperature, and the gesture felt impossibly tender. When the fever came back, it came hard. Archer lost time again, slipping in and out of consciousness while Delilah worked over him. He was vaguely aware of her changing the dressing on his wound, of cold cloths being pressed to his skin, of her voice talking to him steadily, telling him to hold on, to keep fighting. At one point, he thought he heard her praying, or maybe he imagined it. The darkness kept trying to take him, but every time it got close, her voice would pull him back. He woke to cooler air and the sound of a creek running nearby. The tent flap was open, and he could see stars overhead, brilliant against the black sky. The pain in his side had settled into a dull throb instead of the sharp agony he'd felt before, which seemed like progress. When he turned his head, he saw Delilah sitting on a crate near the entrance, her head bowed over something in her lap. She was mending a shirt by the light of a small oil lamp, her needle moving with quick, efficient stitches. "How long this time?" he asked. She looked up, and he saw relief flash across her face before she schooled her expression back to neutral. "About 6 hours. The fever broke an hour ago and hasn't come back. I think you might actually make it, Mr. Novak." "Archer," he said, "if you have been keeping me alive for this long, I think we are past formalities." "Archer, then." She set aside her mending and came to kneel beside him, pressing her hand to his forehead and then his chest. "You are still warm, but nothing like before. Are you hungry?" The moment she said it, his stomach cramped with hunger so intense it almost matched the pain from his wound. "Starving. Good sign." She stood and moved to a small fire he could just see outside the tent. When she returned, she had a tin bowl filled with what looked like thin stew. "It is mostly broth with some rabbit and wild onions. Your stomach needs something gentle." She helped him sit up enough to eat, though the movement sent fresh waves of pain through his side. Archer gritted his teeth and didn't complain. The stew was simple, but well seasoned, and he couldn't remember anything ever tasting so good. He managed half the bowl before exhaustion forced him to stop. "That is enough for now," Delilah said, taking the bowl away. "You can have more in a few hours if you keep that down." "You are good at this," he observed. "The nursing, I mean. My mother was a midwife. I learned from her." She settled back on her crate and picked up her mending again. "Robert was sick for 2 weeks before he died. I did everything I could, but sometimes everything is not enough. I am sorry for your loss." She nodded, not looking up from her work. "It is what it is. Life out here doesn't give you much time for mourning. You grieve while you work, and eventually, the work is all you have left." They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Archer watched her work, noting the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way she occasionally tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She couldn't be much older than 25, he guessed, though the hard life had aged her some. There was a quiet strength to her that he found himself admiring, a determination that had kept him alive when most people would have left him to die. "Why did you do it?" he asked after a while. "Save me, I mean. You don't know me? I could be an outlaw for all you know." Delilah looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "Are you? An outlaw?" "No, madam. Just a cowboy trying to save enough to buy some land." "Then I guess I made the right choice." She went back to her sewing. "And even if you were an outlaw, I couldn't have just left you there. It is not in me to walk away from someone in need. Most people would have. Then most people have harder hearts than mine." She tied off her thread and bit it clean. "Besides, gets lonely out here by yourself. Nice to have someone to talk to, even if that someone is half dead with fever." Archer found himself smiling, despite the pain. "Glad I could provide the entertainment." Over the next 3 days, Archer's strength slowly returned. The infection in his wound began to clear, and he was able to sit up for longer periods without feeling like he might pass out. Delilah continued to care for him with the same steady competence, changing his dressings, making sure he ate regular meals, and gradually allowing him to drink something other than water and willow bark tea. She worked her claim during the daylight hours while he rested, and he could hear the splash of water as she panned in the creek. Sometimes she sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs that drifted into the tent on the hot afternoon air. In the evenings, she would cook their supper and sit with him, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she was 24, originally from Ohio, and had come west with her parents and younger brother when she was 16. Her father had died of a snakebite their first year in California, and her mother had passed 2 years later from a fever. Her brother had headed north to try his luck in the lumber camps around Eureka, and she hadn't heard from him in over a year. Robert was a good man, she told him one evening as they sat outside the tent, Archer propped up against a tree trunk. Steady, reliable, kind. We didn't have the grand passion that people write about in books, but we had respect and affection. That seemed like enough. "Did you love him?" Archer asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry. That is not my business." "No, it is all right." Delilah stared into the fire, her face thoughtful. "I did love him, in my way, but I think I loved the security he offered more than the man himself, if I am being honest. Out here, a woman alone has precious few options. Marriage seemed like the smart choice, and Robert needed a wife. It worked well enough for both of us." "Do you think you'll marry again?" She laughed, but there was little humor in it. "Who would have me? I have no dowry, no property, no prospects. I am a widow with calloused hands and a sunburned face, panning for gold in a creek that barely yields enough to keep me fed. Not exactly what men are looking for in a wife." "I think you are selling yourself short," Archer said quietly. "You are strong, capable, and you have a good heart. Those things are worth more than gold out here." Delilah turned to look at him, something unreadable in her expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Archer felt the air between them shift somehow, becoming charged with a tension that hadn't been there before. Then she looked away, back to the fire, and the moment passed. "You should rest," she said, her voice returning to its usual practical tone. "The more you push yourself, the longer it will take to heal." By the end of the first week, Archer was able to stand and walk short distances, though his side still ached and he tired easily. Delilah had fashioned him a crude crutch from a tree branch, which helped take some of the weight off his injured side. He insisted on making himself useful, helping with small tasks around the camp that didn't require much physical exertion. He cleaned her pans while she worked the creek, mended the tent where it had started to tear, and used his knife to fashion new stakes where the old ones had rotted. It wasn't much, but it made him feel less like a burden. Delilah protested at first, telling him he needed to focus on healing, but he could see she appreciated the help. "You are stubborn," she told him one afternoon, finding him attempting to carry water from the creek. "So are you," he countered, not stopping his careful progress back to camp. "You saved my life through sheer stubbornness, near as I can tell. Seems only fair I pay you back in kind." She took the bucket from him anyway, but she was smiling when she did it. "At least let me carry the heavy things. You are going to tear your stitches, and then, where will we be?" "Back where we started, I suppose, with you playing nursemaid to a fool cowboy." "You said it, not me." Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Delilah would rise at dawn and pan the creek until the afternoon heat became unbearable, then return to camp to rest in the shade and prepare their evening meal. Archer helped where he could and spent his recovery time watching her work, admiring her persistence. The gold she found was sparse, just small flakes and the occasional tiny nugget, but she never complained or showed signs of giving up. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Archer asked her about her plans. "What will you do when you have enough money saved? Where will you go?" Delilah poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "I have been thinking about Oregon. I hear there is good farmland there, and the climate is milder than here. Maybe I could buy a small place, grow vegetables, keep some chickens. Nothing fancy, just enough to live on." "That sounds nice. Peaceful. What about you? What were you planning to do with your pay before it got stolen?" "There is a piece of land about 10 miles east of Angel's Camp," Archer said, the old dream rising in his chest like it always did when he thought about it. 160 acres with a creek running through it, good grazing, some timber. The man who owns it is getting too old to work it and wants to sell. I have been saving for 3 years to buy it. And now? He shrugged, trying to hide his disappointment. Now I start over, I guess. Find another job working cattle, save up again. Maybe in another 3 years, I will have enough. That is a long time. Yes, it is. They fell silent, both lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Archer found himself watching Delilah in the flickering light, noticing details he'd been too sick to appreciate before. The way her hair caught the firelight and turned it gold, the delicate strength in her hands, the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth that suggested she was always just on the verge of smiling even when times were hard. He realized with a start that he was beginning to care for her, really care, in a way that went beyond simple gratitude. The thought should have scared him, but instead, it felt right, like something clicking into place. He'd known her less than 2 weeks, but she'd seen him at his weakest and most vulnerable, and she hadn't turned away. That meant something. Delilah, he started, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. She looked up at him, waiting, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. Yes? Thank you, for everything. I know I have said it before, but I do not think I have said it enough. You could have died saving me, hauling me back here, fighting that infection. A lesser person would have given up. You are welcome, she said softly. And for what it is worth, I am glad you made it. Would have been a shame to lose you. The air between them felt charged again, heavy with things unsaid. Archer wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to tell her that he was starting to feel things he had no right to feel for a woman he barely knew. But he was still weak, still healing, and he had nothing to offer her except his thanks. So instead, he just nodded and looked away, back to the fire. By the second week, Archer was strong enough to help Delilah with her panning. She showed him the technique, how to swirl the water in the pan just right, how to recognize gold among the sand and gravel. It was tedious work, and his respect for her determination grew even more as he realized just how much effort went into finding even the smallest flake of precious metal. How long can you keep doing this? He asked one afternoon as they worked side by side in the creek, the cold water a relief from the August heat. As long as I have to, she replied, not looking up from her pan. Winter is coming eventually, and I need enough to see me through. After that, we will see. You could always head into Angel's Camp, find work there. I hear the hotels and saloons are always looking for help. Delilah's mouth tightened. I know what kind of work they offer women in saloons, Archer. I would rather starve out here than do that. I did not mean it that way, he said quickly. I just meant honest work, cooking or cleaning or such. I know what you meant. Her expression softened. But the truth is, working for someone else means giving up my independence. Out here, I am my own boss. The gold I find is mine. The decisions I make are mine. It might not be much, but it is mine. That matters to me. He understood that. He'd felt the same way working other people's cattle instead of his own. There was a fundamental difference between working for yourself and working for someone else. And once you tasted that independence, it was hard to give it up. They worked in companionable silence for a while, and Archer found himself stealing glances at her when she wasn't looking. She'd rolled up the sleeves of her dress and hiked the skirt up and tucked it into her belt to keep it dry, revealing strong calves and bare feet that gripped the smooth creek stones with practiced ease. There was grace in the way she moved, efficiency in every motion, and he found it mesmerizing. That evening, as Delilah cooked their supper, a rider appeared on the far bank of the creek. Archer instinctively reached for a gun he no longer had, his body tensing despite the jolt of pain the movement caused. Delilah straightened, her hand moving to a rifle leaning against a nearby tree that Archer hadn't noticed before. The rider was an older man, weathered and grizzled, with a marshal's badge visible on his vest. He raised one hand in a peaceful gesture. Easy there, folks. Name is Marshal Garrett from Angel's Camp. I am not looking for trouble. What are you looking for? Delilah called back, not moving toward her rifle, but not taking her hand away from it either. Got reports of a shooting on the road from Sonora about 2 weeks back. Found a dead horse and a lot of blood, but no body. Been checking the camps between here and there, seeing if anyone knows anything about it. Archer stepped forward, wincing. That would be me, Marshal. I am the one who got shot. Marshal Garrett urged his horse across the creek, his sharp eyes taking in Archer's condition and the camp setup. "You want to tell me what happened, son?" Archer related the story, describing the four men who'd robbed him and the direction they'd been heading when they rode off. The marshal listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Archer finished, Garrett nodded slowly. "Sounds like the Turner gang. They have been working this area for the past month, hitting travelers and small mining camps. We've got wanted posters on all four of them." He looked at Delilah. "You the one who's been keeping him alive, madam?" "Yes, sir." "Did a fine job of it, too, from the looks of things. Most men would have died from a wound like that, especially with the infection he must have had." The marshal pulled out a notebook and pencil. "I will need descriptions of the men if you can provide them, Mr. Novak, Archer Novak." He described the four men as best he could remember, though his memories of the attack were fragmented. The marshal wrote it all down, then tucked the notebook away. "I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Novak. If we catch these men, there is a reward. $200 for the whole gang, dead or alive. I will make sure you get it if we bring them in." $200. Not as much as he'd lost, but it would be a start toward his land. "Thank you, Marshal." Garrett tipped his hat to Delilah. "Madam, you take care now. And Mr. Novak, you might want to think about staying close to Angel's camp once you are healed up. The Turner gang doesn't like leaving witnesses." With that cheerful warning, the marshal rode off, leaving Archer and Delilah standing by the creek as the sun set behind the western hills. Delilah finally moved her hand away from the rifle, and Archer saw that her fingers were trembling slightly. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine, just not used to having armed men ride into camp." She went back to the fire and their half-cooked supper. "Did that worry you, what he said about the gang?" "Some," Archer admitted, "but they got what they wanted from me. No reason for them to come back." Delilah didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. They ate their supper in relative silence, both lost in thought. Archer found himself watching the darkening hills around them, wondering if the Turner gang was out there somewhere, and if they might recognize him if they crossed paths again. That night, he lay awake in the tent, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Delilah slept a few feet away on her own bedroll, her breathing slow and steady. He'd been sharing her tent for 2 weeks now, but she'd always maintained a careful distance, both physically and emotionally. He respected that, even as he wished things could be different. The truth was, he was falling for her. Maybe had already fallen. She was unlike any woman he'd ever known, tough and tender in equal measure, capable of both nursing a dying man and surviving alone in the wilderness. She didn't need rescuing, didn't need a man to take care of her, and somehow that made him want to be the one who stood beside her all the more. But what did he have to offer? He was a cowboy with no money, no prospects, and a healing bullet wound. She deserved better than that. She deserved someone who could give her that farm in Oregon, that peaceful life she dreamed about. All he could give her was his gratitude and a heart that was quickly becoming hers, whether she wanted it or not. The days continued to pass, bleeding into the 3rd week of Archer's recovery. His wound was healing well, the stitches holding firm, and the infection was completely gone. He could move without pain now, though Delilah still cautioned him against overdoing it. They fell into an easy partnership, working the claim together, sharing meals and conversation, and slowly getting to know each other in the way that only happened when two people spent every waking hour together. Archer learned that Delilah loved reading, but rarely had access to books, that she was afraid of spiders but could handle snakes without flinching, that she had wanted to be a teacher when she was younger but never had the opportunity, that her favorite color was blue, like the sky just after dawn. She learned that he'd grown up in Texas, the youngest of 5 boys, and that he'd left home at 16 to make his own way, that he'd worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, and even spent a season as a deputy in a small town in Nevada before deciding it wasn't for him, that he played the harmonica but hadn't owned one in years, that he dreamed of breeding horses someday, raising strong stock that could handle the rough country. They shared stories and secrets, hopes and fears, and with each passing day the space between them seemed to shrink. Archer found excuses to stand close to her, to touch her hand when passing her things, to let his gaze linger on her face. And sometimes, when he caught her looking at him with something warm and wondering in her eyes, he thought maybe, just maybe, she might be feeling the same pull he was. One evening, 3 weeks after she'd found him, they were sitting by the fire when Delilah suddenly stood and walked to her tent. She returned a moment later, carrying a battered guitar case that Archer had never noticed before. "I did not know you played," he said, as she pulled out the instrument and began tuning it. "Not well, but well enough." She strummed a few chords, adjusting the pegs. "Robert taught me. He said every home should have music in it." "Will you play something?" She hesitated, then nodded. Her fingers moved across the strings, picking out a melody that was both melancholy and beautiful. Then she began to sing, her voice clear and true, carrying across the darkening landscape. It was a song about home and longing, about loving and losing, and it pierced Archer's heart in ways he hadn't expected. When she finished, he couldn't speak for a moment. "That was beautiful," he finally managed. "Thank you." She set the guitar aside carefully. "I have not played for anyone since Robert died. Did not see much point to it." "Why did you play now?" She met his eyes across the fire. "Because you are leaving soon, are you not? You are healed enough to travel, and there is no reason for you to stay here. I thought maybe it would be nice to have one good memory before you go." The statement hit him like a physical blow. She was right, of course. He was healed enough to make it to Angel's Camp, to start rebuilding his life. But the thought of leaving her, of walking away from this little camp, and the woman who'd saved him, felt wrong in every possible way. "What if I do not want to leave?" he said quietly. Delilah's breath caught, and he saw hope flash across her face before she schooled her expression back to neutral. "You have your own life to live, Archer, your own dreams. I will not hold you here out of some misplaced sense of obligation." "It is not obligation." He stood, circling the fire to kneel in front of her. His side protested the movement, but he ignored it. "Delilah, these past 3 weeks, getting to know you, working beside you, it has been the best time of my life. I know that sounds crazy considering I spent half of it half dead with fever, but it is true. You are remarkable, and I do not want to walk away from you. Archer." She shook her head. "You do not know what you are saying. You are grateful, and that is natural, but gratitude is not the same as what you are implying." "I am not implying anything. I am telling you straight that I am falling in love with you, and I think maybe you might feel something for me, too." He reached out and took her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. "Tell me I am wrong. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will leave tomorrow and never bother you again." She stared at their joined hands for a long moment, and when she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "I cannot tell you that. I cannot tell you that because it would be a lie." Her voice broke. "But Archer, what kind of future could we have? Neither of us has anything. We would be starting from nothing." "Then we start from nothing together." He squeezed her hand gently. "I had a plan before. Save money, buy land, build a life. But plans change. Maybe this is better. Maybe we are better together than either of us could be apart. You want to stay here, pan for gold with me? If that is what you are doing, then yes. Or we could go to Angel's Camp, both of us, and find work. Or we could head to Oregon and look for that farm you want. I do not care what we do, as long as we do it together." Delilah pulled her hand free and stood, pacing away from him. Archer stayed where he was, letting her think, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He'd laid everything out, all his feelings exposed and vulnerable. Now all he could do was wait. "My whole life, I have made practical choices," she said finally, her back still to him. "I married Robert because it was practical. I am out here panning because it seemed like the practical thing to do. I have always chosen security over passion, safety over risk. And you know what? I have been miserable. Not constantly, but there has always been this little voice in the back of my mind asking if this is all there is, if there is not supposed to be more to life than just surviving." She turned to face him, and the look on her face made his breath catch. "Then you showed up, half dead and completely dependent on me, and suddenly everything changed. Taking care of you, talking to you, learning who you are, it has reminded me that there is more to life than just getting through each day. You make me want to take risks again, to believe in something beyond just survival." "Then believe in us," Archer said, standing carefully. "Believe that we can build something together." Delilah crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and kissed him. It was sudden and fierce and desperate, and Archer felt the last piece of his heart that he'd been holding in reserve fall completely into her keeping. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of his healing wound, and kissed her back with everything he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Delilah laughed shakily. "This is crazy. We have known each other for less than a month." "Best month of my life," Archer said, resting his forehead against hers. "And if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make sure you never regret this." "I will hold you to that," she whispered, then kissed him again. They spent that night talking and planning, sitting close together by the dying fire. They decided to stay at the camp for another week or two, giving Archer more time to fully heal and allowing them to accumulate a bit more gold. Then they would head to Angel's Camp together, pool their resources, and decide on their next move from there. "We could get married," Archer suggested, as the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky. "Make it official." Delilah smiled, tired but happy. "Are you proposing, Archer Novak?" "I suppose I am." He took both her hands in his. "I do not have a ring, and I cannot promise you an easy life, but I can promise that I will work every day to make you happy, to build the life we both want. So yes, Delilah Lawson, I am asking you to marry me." "Then my answer is yes." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "Yes to marriage, yes to building a life together, yes to all of it." They held each other as the sun rose over the California hills, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and decided to take a chance on love. It was impractical and risky and completely insane. It was also the most right thing Archer had ever done. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Archer's strength continued to return, and he was able to do more of the heavy labor around camp. They worked the creek together every day, and while the gold remained sparse, they were building up a small reserve. More importantly, they were building a life together, learning each other's rhythms and habits, figuring out how to work as a team. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Delilah wanted children someday, she told him one evening, at least 2 or 3. Archer admitted he'd never thought much about being a father, but found the idea appealing when he imagined doing it with her. They discussed where they might want to settle, what kind of work they could do, how they would navigate the challenges that life would inevitably throw at them. "I want to do things right this time," Delilah said one night as they lay side by side looking up at the stars. "With Robert, we were practical partners, but there was never much passion. With you, I feel like my heart might burst sometimes, just from looking at you. I want to hold on to that feeling." "We will," Archer promised, taking her hand. "That feeling is what will carry us through the hard times. We just have to remember it when things get difficult." On their last full day at the camp, Delilah found a nugget in her pan the size of her thumbnail. She let out a whoop of excitement that brought Archer running from where he'd been gathering firewood. They spent the rest of the afternoon carefully working that section of the creek and found several more small nuggets and a significant amount of flakes. "This is enough," Delilah said that evening as they counted their take. "This plus what we already have, it is enough to see us through for a while. We can head into Angel's Camp tomorrow." They packed up camp the next morning, loading Delilah's mule with their supplies and the tent. The walk to Angel's Camp took most of the day, and Archer's side ached by the time they finally reached the outskirts of town, but he refused to complain. Delilah walked beside him, occasionally reaching out to steady him when the ground was rough, and her presence made every step worth it. Angel's Camp was a bustling mining town, full of prospectors and merchants, saloons, and supply stores. They found a boarding house run by a widow named Martha Henderson, who took one look at them and seemed to understand their situation immediately. "I have got a room available," she said, showing them upstairs to a small but clean space with a double bed and a washstand. $3 a week, includes breakfast and supper. You two married?" "Not yet," Archer said, "but we are planning on it soon." Martha nodded approvingly. "Well, until you make it official, I expect proper behavior under my roof. Understood?" They both agreed, though Archer caught Delilah trying to hide a smile. Once Martha left them alone, Delilah turned to him and laughed. "She is going to be watching us like a hawk." "Probably a good thing," Archer replied, pulling her close carefully. "Otherwise, I might not be able to keep my hands off you." "Who says I want you to?" Delilah teased, then kissed him before pulling away. "But she is right. We should do things properly. Find a preacher, get married the right way." They spent the next few days getting settled in the Angels' camp and making arrangements for their wedding. Archer sold some of Delilah's gold to get them some immediate cash, and he used part of it to buy her a simple gold wedding band from the town jeweler. It wasn't fancy, but when he slipped it onto her finger to check the size, Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "It is perfect," she said softly. They found a preacher willing to perform the ceremony, and Archer bought a new shirt for the occasion, while Delilah purchased fabric and spent 2 days making herself a new dress. It was pale blue cotton, simple but pretty, and when Archer saw her in it for the first time on their wedding day, he forgot how to breathe. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town, with Martha and her husband Samuel serving as witnesses. It was nothing fancy, no flowers or music or big celebration, just two people standing before God and promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. But when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Archer kissed his new bride, he felt like the richest man in California. Martha had prepared a small wedding supper for them back at the boarding house, and several of the other residents joined in the celebration. There was food and even a little music when someone produced a fiddle. Archer danced with Delilah in the boarding house parlor, careful of his still healing side, and felt complete in a way he never had before. That night, in their little room, they finally consummated their marriage. Archer was gentle and careful, mindful of both his wound and Delilah's needs, and when they lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, he knew he'd found his home. Not in a place, but in her. "I love you," Delilah whispered in the darkness. "I know I have said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Archer Novak." "I love you too," he replied, holding her close. "More than I knew I could love anything." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Archer found work with a freight company, loading and unloading wagons, while Delilah took in mending and laundry to supplement their income. It was hard work, but they were together, and that made all the difference. In the evenings, they would return to their little room, share supper, and talk about their plans. They were saving every penny they could, building toward their future. Archer had told Delilah about the land he'd wanted to buy, and they'd decided to make it their goal. It would take time, longer now than it would have before he'd been robbed, but they were patient. They had their whole lives ahead of them. 2 months after their wedding, Marshal Garrett came looking for Archer. The Turner gang had been caught robbing a stage outside of Sonora, and there'd been a shootout. 3 of the 4 men were dead, and the 4th was in custody awaiting trial. As promised, the marshal had brought Archer's share of the reward money. $200, Garrett said, counting out the bills. "The gang did not have much on them when we caught up to them, so we could not recover what they stole from you, but this should help some." Archer thanked him and took the money home to Delilah. They sat on their bed and counted it carefully, then added it to their savings. They were getting closer to their goal, closer to being able to afford that piece of land. "Maybe by spring," Delilah said hopefully. "If we keep saving like we have been, maybe we will have enough by spring." Spring came sooner than expected, and with it, unexpected news. Delilah had been feeling tired and unwell for several weeks, and when she finally went to see the town doctor, he confirmed what she'd already suspected. She was pregnant, due sometime in the early fall. Archer's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, until she reminded him about the baby, and he carefully set her back down, apologizing profusely. They held each other in their little room, marveling at the new life they'd created, already imagining what their child would be like. The pregnancy changed their timelines somewhat. Delilah had to stop taking in laundry as the work became too physically demanding, which meant less income. Archer picked up extra shifts when he could, but it meant they had to postpone buying the land. They discussed it one evening, and both agreed that having a proper home for their baby was more important than sticking to their original schedule. "We will get there," Archer assured her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Maybe not as soon as we planned, but we will get there." "I know we will," Delilah said, covering his hand with hers. "We have come this far together. Nothing is going to stop us now." 6 months into Delilah's pregnancy, opportunity came from an unexpected source. The owner of the freight company Archer worked for was getting older and wanted to sell his business. He offered Archer a deal, half the asking price up front, and the rest paid out over 2 years from the business profits. It would mean giving up on the land for now, but it would also mean steady income and a chance to build something of their own. Archer and Delilah talked about it long into the night, weighing the pros and cons. In the end, they decided to take the risk. They used all their savings as the down payment and became the owners of a freight business. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The work was hard, harder than anything Archer had done before. He was up before dawn and rarely home before dark, organizing routes and drivers, negotiating contracts, handling the countless details that went into running a business. Delilah helped where she could, managing the books and correspondence from their room, her growing belly making it difficult to do much else. But slowly, the business began to thrive. Archer had a good reputation for reliability and fair dealing, and word spread. They began getting more contracts, and he was able to hire additional drivers and equipment. The money started coming in steadily, and they were able to meet their payment obligations with room to spare. Their son was born on a crisp October evening in 1879, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him James Robert Novak, after no one in particular except that they both liked the name James, and Robert to honor Delilah's first husband, who'd been a good man even if she hadn't loved him the way she loved Archer. Being parents was both harder and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. Jamie, as they called him, was a demanding baby who seemed to sleep only when it was least convenient. But when he looked up at them with those bright green eyes, or wrapped his tiny fist around Archer's finger, every sleepless night was worth it. Delilah proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when exhausted. Archer did his best to help when he could, taking late-night shifts with the baby so Delilah could sleep, changing diapers and learning to soothe Jamie's cries. They were a team in this, as they were in everything, supporting each other through the challenges. The freight business continued to grow. By the time Jamie was a year old, they'd paid off the debt and owned the company outright. They moved out of the boarding house and into a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but theirs. It had 3 rooms, a real kitchen, and a yard where Jamie could play as he grew. "This is not what we planned," Delilah said one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching Jamie toddle around the yard chasing a butterfly. "We were supposed to have land, raise horses, be ranchers." "No," Archer corrected gently, taking her hand. "We planned to build a life together. The details have changed, but the important part hasn't. We are together, we have our son, and we are making it work. That is all that matters." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are right. I just sometimes wonder what would have happened if things had gone according to plan." "I would not have met you," Archer pointed out. "If I had not been shot and robbed, I never would have been crawling through that wilderness for you to find. So I will take this life over any other, every single time." Delilah lifted her head and kissed him. "I love you, you know that?" "I know, I love you too." 3 years after their wedding, Archer was approached by a rancher named Douglas Mitchell who had a proposition. Mitchell owned a large spread east of town but was having trouble getting his cattle to market reliably. He proposed a partnership where Archer's freight company would handle all of Mitchell's shipping needs, and in exchange, Mitchell would give Archer a share of his profits plus the opportunity to run cattle on Mitchell's land. It was the opportunity Archer had been waiting for. He could keep the freight business running, which provided steady income, while also getting back into the cattle business he loved. He discussed it with Delilah, and they both agreed it was too good an opportunity to pass up. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Archer hired a manager to handle the day-to-day operations of the freight business, while he focused on learning the cattle operation. Mitchell proved to be a fair partner, teaching Archer everything he knew about breeding and raising quality stock. Within 2 years, Archer had accumulated enough cattle of his own to consider himself a genuine rancher. Jamie grew from a toddler into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Archer taught him to ride when he was 4, seating him carefully on a gentle mare and walking beside them until the boy got his confidence. Delilah would stand at the fence and watch, her hand resting protectively on her swelling belly, for she was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 1882. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and Archer fell completely in love with her the moment he held her tiny, squirming body in his arms. Jamie, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was more enthusiastic than effective. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The freight business continued to operate successfully under its manager, providing a steady income. The cattle operation was growing, and Archer's partnership with Mitchell was proving profitable. They had added rooms onto their house to accommodate their growing family, and Delilah had planted a garden that produced vegetables throughout the summer and fall. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Archer still worked long hours, but he always made time for his family. Every evening, no matter how tired he was, he would read to Jamie and rock Grace to sleep. On Sundays, they would pack a picnic and take the children out to a favorite spot by a creek, spending the day relaxing and being together. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked him one Sunday afternoon, as they sat watching Jamie teach Grace how to skip stones. Though at 2 years old, she was mostly just throwing them in the water and laughing. Giving up on that original piece of land, taking all these detours to get where we are now? Archer considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked him things. "No," he said finally. "Every detour brought us something valuable. If we'd bought that land right away, I never would have learned about running a business. We might have struggled more, maybe even failed. This way, we built slowly, learned as we went, and now we are stronger for it." "I am glad you feel that way," Delilah said, leaning against him, "because I have some news that might be considered another detour." Archer looked at her, noting the sparkle in her eyes. "You are pregnant again, aren't you?" "How did you know?" "You get this glow about you. Plus, you have been falling asleep right after supper for the past week." He kissed her forehead. "Another baby is not a detour, Delilah. It is a blessing." Their third child, another boy they named Thomas Andrew, was born in early 1884. He was a quiet baby, unlike Jamie, who'd been demanding, and he seemed content to just observe the world around him with solemn, dark eyes. The house was full and chaotic, and Archer and Delilah loved every minute of it. In 1885, Douglas Mitchell decided to retire and move to San Francisco to be near his daughter. He offered to sell his ranch to Archer at a more than fair price, with generous terms for payment. It was a huge decision, one that would stretch them financially, but it also represented everything they'd been working toward. "It is 1,800 acres, Archer told Delilah as they discussed it late one night, the children finally asleep. "Good grazing, water rights, timber, everything we need. We could keep running the freight business for steady income while we build the ranch. In 10 years, maybe less, we could be one of the biggest cattle operations in this part of California." "That is a lot of responsibility," Delilah said carefully, "and a lot of risk." "It is, but when have we ever chosen the safe path?" He took her hands. "I am not saying we have to do this. If you want to stay where we are, keep things as they are, I will be happy with that. But this feels like our moment, Delilah. This feels like what we have been building toward all these years." Delilah was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she nodded. "You are right. This is what we have been working for. Let's do it." They bought the ranch, officially becoming the owners of what they renamed the Novak Ranch in the fall of 1885. Moving their family from their comfortable house in town to the ranch house was an adventure. The ranch house was larger but also older, in need of repairs and updating. Delilah threw herself into making it a home, and Archer spent every spare moment fixing things and making improvements. Jamie, now 6 years old, loved the ranch from the moment they arrived. He shadowed his father everywhere, learning about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. Grace, at 3, was more interested in the chickens Delilah started keeping and the kittens that lived in the barn. Thomas, just over a year old, was content anywhere as long as his mother was nearby. The first few years on the ranch were challenging. There was always more work than hours in the day, always something that needed fixing or tending. Archer hired ranch hands to help with the work, but he was still involved in every aspect of the operation. Delilah managed the household, raised the children, kept the books, and somehow still found time to help with ranch work when needed. But they were building something real, something lasting, and they could both feel it. The cattle herd grew. The land prospered under their care. Their children grew healthy and strong, learning the value of hard work and family. And through it all, Archer and Delilah's love for each other only deepened. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Archer surprised Delilah with a gift. He'd sold some cattle and used the money to buy the original piece of land he'd been saving for all those years ago, the 160 acres with the creek running through it. It bordered their current property, expanding the ranch significantly. "I never forgot about it," he told her as they rode out to look at their new land. "Even when we took different paths, I always remembered that This was where we were supposed to end up. It just took us a little longer than planned. Delilah looked out over the land, tears streaming down her face. It is perfect. Everything is perfect. Not everything, Archer said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. But we are getting pretty close. They stood together on their land, watching the creek flow past, and Archer thought back to that day 11 years ago when he'd woken up burning with fever in a tent by a different creek. He'd been half dead, broke, and hopeless. And then Delilah had been there, determined to save him against all odds. She'd done more than save his life. She'd given him a reason to live it, a purpose beyond just survival. Together, they'd built something neither of them could have achieved alone. They'd faced challenges and setbacks, had taken detours and made sacrifices, but they'd done it all together, and that had made all the difference. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, leaning against him. "About how lucky I am. How grateful I am that you found me that day, that you didn't give up on me." "I could never give up on you," she said simply. "From the moment I decided to save you, you became mine, and I don't give up on what is mine." He kissed her then, long and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "Come on," Delilah said, taking his hand. "Let's go home. Our children will be wondering where we are." They rode back to the ranch together as the sun began to set, painting the California sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, and they could see their children playing in the yard. Jamie was teaching Grace and Thomas how to rope a fence post, and their laughter carried across the distance. This was home, not just the land or the buildings, but the life they'd built together, the family they'd created, the love that bound them all together. Archer had started with nothing but a fever dream and woken to find salvation. Now he had everything that mattered. As they approached the house, Jamie spotted them and came running. "Papa, Mama, look what I can do!" He proceeded to demonstrate his roping skills, which were actually quite impressive for a 10-year-old. "That is wonderful, son," Archer said, ruffling his hair. "You keep practicing, and someday you will be better than me." "I already am," Jamie said with the confidence of youth, and everyone laughed. They went inside together as a family, and Delilah started preparing supper while Archer helped the children wash up. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special or remarkable, just a family going about their routine. But to Archer, it was everything. This simple domestic happiness was what he'd been searching for his whole life without even knowing it. That night, after the children were in bed, Archer and Delilah sat on their porch, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't found me?" Archer asked. Delilah was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, I suppose I would have kept panning for gold, saved enough to buy a small place somewhere, lived out my days alone. It would have been a life, but not this life." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Archer Novak. That day I found you, dying in the wilderness, was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just me going through the motions, surviving, but not really living. I feel the same way. You saved my life in more ways than one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Finally, Delilah spoke again. "I want you to know something. If we lost everything tomorrow, if the ranch failed and we had to start over with nothing, I would be all right with that. As long as I had you and our children, I would be all right. Everything else is just details." Archer pulled her close, holding her against his chest. "We are not going to lose everything, but if we did, we would just build it back. We have done it before. We could do it again. That is what we do, you and I. We build and we fight and we never give up." "Never," Delilah agreed. "We never give up." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. The ranch prospered, growing into one of the most successful operations in Calaveras County. Archer's reputation as a fair dealer and expert cattleman spread, and people came from all over seeking his advice. The freight business continued to operate successfully, eventually being taken over by Jamie when he was old enough, giving him his own enterprise to run. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman who loved horses as much as her father did and had a natural talent for training them. Thomas, quiet and thoughtful, surprised everyone by developing a gift for numbers and eventually taking over the ranch's financial management, freeing Archer to focus on the parts of ranching he loved most. Delilah remained the heart of their family, the steady center around which everything revolved. She managed their home with grace and efficiency, raised their children to be good people, and stood beside Archer through every challenge and triumph. She never lost her determination, that core of steel that had saved Archer's life all those years ago, and he loved her more with each passing year. They added a fourth child to their family, another daughter named Helen Marie, born when Delilah was 34. She was their last baby, and they both doted on her shamelessly. The older children adored their little sister, and the house was full of laughter and love. As the century drew to a close, Archer and Delilah found themselves becoming grandparents. Jamie married a sweet girl named Catherine from Angel's Camp, and they gave Archer and Delilah their first grandchild, a boy they named Archer Jr. in 1897. More grandchildren followed as Grace and eventually Thomas married and started their own families. The ranch house expanded to accommodate family gatherings, and Sunday dinners became a tradition that brought everyone together. Archer would sit at the head of the table, Delilah at his side, and look around at the children and grandchildren they'd created and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. On a warm June evening in 1904, Archer and Delilah celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children had organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. There was food and music and dancing, and Archer danced with his wife under the stars, just as he had at their simple wedding all those years ago. 25 years, Delilah marveled as they swayed to the music. Where did the time go? Into this, Archer said, gesturing at the ranch, their family, the life they'd built. Into everything that matters. Do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed? You promised to work every day to make me happy. I remember. You kept that promise. Every single day you have kept that promise. Tears glistened in her eyes. I hope you know that you made me happier than I ever thought possible. The feeling is entirely mutual, Archer said, kissing her forehead. You are my everything, Delilah. My salvation, my partner, my love. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They held each other close as the music played and their family celebrated around them. 25 years of marriage, of building and growing and loving. They'd started with nothing but determination and love, and they'd created an empire, not of money or land, but of family and happiness and shared purpose. As the party wound down and their guests began to leave, Archer and Delilah stood on their porch, waving goodbye, arms around each other. Their children were settled with their own families. The ranch was thriving, and they had each other. What more could anyone ask for? Are you tired? Delilah asked. Exhausted, Archer admitted. But the good kind of tired. The best kind, she agreed. They went inside together, walking through the house they had made into a home over the past 19 years. Pictures of their children and grandchildren covered the walls, reminders of the family they had created. The house was quiet now, everyone else gone, just the two of them, like it had been in the beginning. In their bedroom, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Archer watched Delilah's brush out her hair, now streaked with silver, and thought she was even more beautiful than she'd been at 24. Time had marked her face with lines, but they were lines of laughter and love, and he treasured every one. What are you looking at? She asked, catching his gaze in the mirror. My wife, the woman who saved my life and then made it worth living. She set down her brush and came to him, settling into his arms. We saved each other, I think. I was just surviving before you. You gave me a reason to really live. They climbed into bed and lay facing each other, hands clasped between them. This was Archer's favorite time of day. These quiet moments when it was just the two of them. No ranch business or family obligations, just husband and wife, together. I love you, he said, as he did every night. I love you too, she replied, as she had every night for 25 years. They fell asleep like that, holding hands, their foreheads touching, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. The fever that had nearly killed Archer had instead brought him to the woman who would save him in every way that mattered, and her determination, that stubborn refusal to let him die, had given them both a chance at the kind of love that most people only dreamed about. Outside, the California night was peaceful and quiet. The cattle grazed in the pastures, the The creek ran through their land just as it always had. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And in the ranch house, Archer and Delilah Novak slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts beating in time, two lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing without the other. Their story had started with a gunshot and a fever, with desperation and determination. It had grown through challenges and triumphs, through hard work and unwavering love, and it continued still, day after day, year after year, a testament to the power of two people who refused to give up on each other or on the life they were building together. In the years that followed, they continued to thrive. Archer and Delilah grew old together, watching their grandchildren grow and eventually their great-grandchildren arrive. They never stopped working the ranch, though they gradually turned over more responsibilities to their children. They never stopped loving each other, never stopped being each other's first thought in the morning and last thought at night. When friends or family asked them the secret to their long and happy marriage, they always gave the same answer: hard work, determination, and never forgetting that they were a team. Everything else was just details. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, Archer thought back to the day when he'd woken burning with fever to find a determined woman tending his wounds, he would smile and send up a prayer of thanks. For that fever, for that gunshot, for every twist of fate that had brought him to that creek where Delilah had been panning for gold. Because all of it, every painful step of the journey, had been necessary to bring them together. Delilah had saved him with nothing but determination, and in saving him, she'd saved herself too, giving both of them a chance at the kind of happiness that made every hardship worthwhile. Their love story wasn't the easiest or the simplest, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.